Welcome to Bedtime Stories Creepy, where dreams take a dark turn and nightmares come to life. Make sure to relax and enjoy the chilling tales that await you. Every video is a product of passion and meticulous effort. If you're enjoying the content, show some love by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Caution: the following content contains unsettling themes and may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Lost Boy. I was doing the dishes when my son told me that he'd made a new friend. He tugged on my pant leg and asked me if his new friend could come inside. We'd just moved into a quiet, suburban neighborhood in Minnesota, and I remember being happy that Atticus was already meeting people. So I went to the front door, expecting to meet a neighborhood boy. There was nothing, just an empty screen door opening up to a cool spring morning. I looked quizzically down at my son, who was still beaming with pride and excitement at the prospect of an afternoon playing with his new buddy. "His name's Jeb. Can he come in?" "Buddy, there's nobody there," I said to him. Addie's face immediately pulled down in an undignified frown. "He's right there," Atticus pouted. My grin only irritated him further. "He is, though," Atticus insisted. I humored him. Nothing. Just balmy sunlight streaming into our house and various bugs pelting themselves against the screen trying to get in. I assumed that Atticus had made a friend, as in literally made himself an imaginary friend. I tried not to show any disappointment because I've heard that it's completely normal behavior for a 7-year-old to do things like this. I made a mental note to be a better dad and take him to the playground more often. "All right, buddy. Well, I can't see him. You say his name is Jeb." "Yeah, he's hurt. Can he come inside to play?" That last comment made my skin itch, and I felt troubled, hurt. A gloom settled around my corridor, and the sunny front yard felt threatening despite blossoming dogwood trees and a sky filled with puffy cumulus clouds. I chastised myself for being afraid of my son's imagination, but Atticus declaring that his invisible friend was hurt made me start a little bit. I eased down into my chair so that we could talk eye to eye. "Why do you say he's hurt?" Atticus was frustrated that I couldn't understand such an obvious concept. "Because his head is all wrong, and he's red," he huffed. He pointed at the screen door. I felt like I'd swallowed a rock. "Can Jeb come in, please?" "No, buddy. Tell Jeb to go home. Maybe some other time." Atticus was distraught by this, and let me know in no uncertain terms that he was displeased and that I was a terrible father. After his timeout, we were able to recoup the day with Legos. When my wife came home, I told her almost all about Atticus's new friend, Jeb. Obviously, I left out that one singular detail. I wrote it off as Addie's overactive imagination and made a note to read more age-appropriate books to him in the future. Maybe something in Watership Down had conjured Jeb. I knew that this would be a non-starter as both Atticus and I really liked Watership Down. "Spooky," Christine said noncommittally. "That's it? Spooky?" Christine shrugged. I don't know what else to say. It's spooky, and he's always been a little strange that way. Do you remember when he was a baby? And he was always smiling at that same corner of the old house. I did remember. Christine never admitted it, but I had always thought that Addie's little preoccupation with that singular corner of the guest bedroom might have had something to do with our expedited move. I'm not normally prone to fearing ghosts and ghoulies, but I could remember many dark, early mornings in the old house where I would feel truly unsettled. I remember trying to feed Atticus, and he wouldn't want the bottle because he would be staring wide-eyed at the corner of the room and smiling. As much as I had tried to attribute that to some weird little quirk in my son, it's not a pleasant thing to experience in the loneliest hours of the night. What's worse is that when Atticus started talking, he started to fear that corner. I remember him wailing "Nuu" pitifully and burying his face in my arms, trying to hide from whatever he saw there. I never told Christine this, but one time I asked him what was wrong, and a much younger Addie told me that he didn't think the man's smile was a nice smile. I also never told Christine about the time that Addie saw a picture of a skull in an old history book, and Addie had plopped his little finger on the picture and beamed, just like the man in the corner. Yes, vaguely. I lied. But that's just Addie's imagination. Smart kids are like that. Well, all I'm saying is that Atticus can be spooky sometimes. It's probably just one more creepy phase of his because you, she pointed playfully, won't stop reading him scary stories. Mr. James helps him sleep. Mr. James helps everyone sleep. It's not like I'm reading him Jack Ketchum. She gave me a look suggesting that I was being pedantic. I knew she was right, and resolved to concede that later, and also to read him some Narnia for a little while. So, should we just ignore Jeb for now? I asked Christine. She nodded. Yeah, but make sure that you don't ever say that he can come inside. Just in case, I finished. Just in case, she nodded prudently. Atticus woke us up that night and asked once again if Jeb could come inside to play. Can he please? He's crying, and he says he's lost. Under no circumstances, buddy. Go back to sleep. I grunted into my pillow. Atticus plodded to my side of the bed and poked me lightly. I can't sleep. He won't stop crying, and he's really loud. I cocked an eyebrow in reply, and he knew to drop it. I rolled out of bed and plucked him up in my arms. Come on, bud. We'll draw the curtains and put on a noisemaker or something. I slung him over my shoulder like a sack of potatoes a way he's loved being carried since he was a baby, and took him into the hallway. Normally Atticus would chuckle softly while I carried him, but tonight I could feel him shaking. By the time I had him back into his bedroom, he was nearly inconsolable. Addie loves his room. It's filled with pictures of astronauts and rocket ships, and he has those cheap glow-in-the-dark stars and planets on every surface in the room. He even made me arrange them into familiar constellations which he could tell you the names of, but I cannot. To me, it's the bedroom I would have wanted for myself as a kid. But as I tucked him into bed, he couldn't stop staring wide-eyed at the narrow band of window, which was visible from behind his solar system curtains. The room was cold too, and by that I mean it felt like being outside on a winter night. I tried to ignore this. You're okay, buddy, I said consolingly, and I moved to shut his curtains. I stopped briefly. The edges of his window were lined in a jagged layer of frost. It was a warm May night outside. There was positively no reason why there should be a frost. I grimaced and watched the layer of frost creep across the windowpane like an infection. I felt that same gloomy dread that I had felt earlier in the afternoon, and I turned to look at my son. His eyes were wide and wet in the dim light from his nightlight. Atticus, I said haltingly, are you afraid of Jeb? Addie nodded silent agreement. I hastily shut the window curtain and knelt by his bedside. He calmed down a little, enough for me to ask him, why, buddy? I thought Jeb was your friend. Addie tried to burrow into his blankets. I think Jeb is getting mad at me. He whimpered. I pressed my mouth into a flat line and looked at the window again. There was nothing for a few moments then. From behind the closed curtain came a long, slow whistle. It was a pathetic and mournful sound and unsteady, as if the whistler were only just learning. It came breathy and sharp from just outside. It was the sad keening of something lost and suffering. I turned back to Atticus. That Jeb? My son nodded and fresh tears welled up in his eyes. His words from earlier came back to me. His head is all wrong, and he's red. All right, stay with us tonight, but let's not make a habit of this. The next day that I discovered that Jeb was real. As I was rolling my trash down the driveway, my neighbor, Dan, came huffing up to meet me in the street. Dan was a typical suburban husband and father, no judgment. So am I, and I saw no reason why the two of us shouldn't have been friends, except that he was insufferably nosy and rather grim. He stayed up most nights reading the police blotter and generally trying to absorb as much terrible information about our little city as he could. Then he would find neighbors and bemoan the state of his town. "Jack, did you hear the news?" He waved excitedly. I now know that whenever Dan gets very animated in the morning, that something terrible has happened. I let my garbage can thud into place and waited politely to hear about the latest awful thing. The Kroger was robbed. His eyes lit up. "Terrific," I said flatly. "Town's kinda going to shit," he murmured. "Gets worse every year." He shook his head. "It never used to be like this." I nodded in apology. "Suppose not," I said. "Anyone die?" He usually only bothered to tell me about these things if someone was killed. Dan shook his head. "Not in that one. But did you hear about the kid?" That piqued my interest a little bit. I asked, even though I didn't want to. "Kid?" Dan shook his head in disbelief. "Kid was riding his bike and got crushed by a drunk driver. It happened at 2 in the afternoon." "Who's drunk at 2 in the afternoon?" "Lots of people." "Oh," and then I asked the question that I didn't want to know the answer to. "Do you know the kid's name?" Dan blinked, surprised that I'd asked. "John. I'm pretty sure it was John something." "Jeb?" His eyes rounded. "Yes. Oh, you already knew. Messed up, right? Killed by a drunk driver at 2 in the afternoon. 3 blocks from our house. 2 in the afternoon. Hey, you okay? You look sick." "I'm fine. I'm gonna run back inside." I turned unsteadily and walked back inside with leaden feet. Thanks for the news, as always. A cursory internet search revealed that indeed, a young boy had been crushed by a drunk driver yesterday afternoon. I tried to remember exactly when Atticus had first spoken to me about Jeb, but it was hazy. When I opened the link to read the entire article, I almost retched. The article displayed the mutilated face of a young boy. The entire right side of his face looked like it had been crushed in by a terrible force, so that all the structure had completely gone out of it, so that it looked like a wet bag of raw meat and hair. His bloodied right eye peered dolefully out from where I thought his cheek should have been, and his mouth was torn into a lipless grimace where the road had burned off the lower half of his face. Jeb's left eye, however, stared out at the viewer with twinkling menace and intelligence. In that moment, I was certain that Jeb was looking at me from my computer monitor. I jerked back from my monitor. I was offended for Jeb, who, in their tasteless desire for page views, had decided it was appropriate to put that image on their website. I slammed my laptop closed and left the room. I even considered calling the local paper to voice my disgust to their editor. I resolved to do this, but when I returned to the webpage, a few hours later the image displayed was a school picture of a smiling young boy with dark brown hair and a gap-toothed grin. In the moment I had reasoned that they must have changed it out of respect. Things didn't get better. Atticus became more and more withdrawn, and no longer asked me if Jeb could come inside to play. He avoided the subject pointedly, and when I asked the next day if Jeb still wanted to come inside, Addy just flattened his mouth and refused to answer me. That night, the whistling was outside his window again. Christine, too, started acting strangely. I started to find thick lines of salt on all our windowsills and in front of our doorways. When I asked Christine about them, she tried to act casually about it. "Just in case," she affirmed. "You don't cover the house in salt on a whim. What's going on?" She didn't respond immediately, but I pressed her. "What's going on?" "Did you know that a little boy got killed right near our house?" she asked me flatly. My heart sank into my stomach, and I looked away guiltily. "Yeah, I didn't want to scare you." "Okay, well now we've moved from Atticus has a creepy imaginary friend to a boy matching the name of Addie's imaginary friend was killed outside our house on the same day that Addie started seeing him." She took a breath. something's going on. Addie's room is always freezing, and I'm hearing whistling outside the house. And why are you smiling? I forced a frown. Sorry, it's just nice to not feel like I'm going crazy. She waved her hand. You know you don't need to try and handle all of this stuff on your own, she shuddered. Something's happening with our son. We tried all the layman's tricks. She burned sage in the house and started calling priests to try and bless us. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel silly doing things like that. Why would salt and sage and priests work? Yet they seemed to. Atticus didn't mention anything about Jeb for a long time, and in a week or two, he started to come out of his shell again. The peace lasted for almost 2 weeks, but that ended when I heard a metallic crash from the backside of our house, and our motion detector was triggered, engaging the floodlights. I was still mostly asleep when I blindly tore through our kitchen to burst through the back door, but I knew with a sick feeling what the sound had been. Despite the stillness of the backyard, I knew that something was wrong. The crickets and insects were utterly silent, and our floodlight illuminated the sycamores in a jarring white light. The energy was tense and expectant, even though nothing was there. I didn't bother to scan the yard, but ran instead to the side of the house to confirm my suspicion about the source of the noise. Our cellar door gaped open, and the inside latch was torn apart and hanging uselessly. I had an unobstructed view of our basement steps, leading into the utter darkness beneath our house. Then a few things happened in quick succession. First, a sharp whistle wafted from the dark basement at the foot of the cellar steps. Before, the sound had been piteous and soft, as if the whistler had been shy and plaintive. Now, it was piercing and shrill with a terrible potency behind it. Second, the wooden steps leading from the basement to our kitchen shuddered violently as something sprinted furiously towards the kitchen door. Third, Atticus started wailing in terror. It took me no more than 3 seconds to get to Addie's room, where I found he and Christine huddled together on the bed with him screaming in terror. He was so distraught that he couldn't stop hiccuping, and between fits he would murmur, "He's so mad. What did you do?" We all looked at each other hopelessly as the temperature in Atticus's bedroom plummeted, caught together in this nightmare. All of us spent the night in the master bedroom, with lines of salt laid down in front of every entrance, and a Virgin Mary prayer candle sputtering on the shelf. I didn't sleep a wink. I couldn't, not with the sound of tiny footsteps pattering up and down our hallway all night long. Things haven't gotten any better. I asked Atticus if Jeb had told him what he wanted. The answer that Atticus gave leaves me with no doubt that he's in terrible danger. Jeb wants to play with me forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey through creepy stories. Each story is crafted with care and dedication, ensuring that every spine-chilling moment is captured just for you. If you enjoyed these tales and appreciate the effort that goes into producing them, don't forget to subscribe to Bedtime Stories Creepy for more nightmares that will keep you up at night.